Yeah, John, give us an overview of the changes, our personal morning chalk up feed.
That's right.
Todd, give
Yes.
me a little intro, Todd, and then I'll go into
No,
it.
we should
Yeah. I think
definitely.
that's the intro. This is the intro right here. Luke said exactly what should happen. John, you are our personal morning chalk up. We are lowly CrossFit affiliate
let me
attendees.
hit the gong, and then John, you can start.
Yeah. And we want to know. All right. So for those just listening, Luke is staying at an Airbnb that has a gong. And so this is the signifier that the podcast has started. I do listen to like a meditation podcast with Tara Brach sometimes, and there's different intros, and one of them is actually like some sort of like gong style thing. So I think it's a well-established trope in the podcasting community. And I think it works great. So let that gong hit be the intro to John's personal morning chalk up delivery to Luke and I of the details of the new CrossFit Games season. Let's hear it.
All right, that was beautiful. I love a good, concise opening. So obviously, a new year, new changes to the season once again. Things are getting a little bit, I hasten to say, more organized at HQ. Semifinals is dropping from 10 to 7 events. So North America is dropping down from 4 events to 2. Europe is dropping from 2 to 1. But they are doubling the number of people at each event and doubling the number of games qualifiers from each event. So essentially each continent still has the same number of games qualifiers from their semifinals. The other big thing is that HQ is now going to program all semifinal events, and they are running the events in North America and Europe. All the events outside of North America and Europe are still run by the people who ran them last year, but they're being given the workouts by HQ. So it's going to be standardized programming across all the events this year. So that's the main points. Obviously, there's a lot of detail to be filled in there, but semifinals are programmed by HQ. There is less events than last year, and they're all going to be taking place over the 2 or 3 weekends, I believe.
So we have from the US and Europe region 10 spots for the individual, right? And then Africa
in each event. Yep.
Africa has 1, Asia has 1, South America has 1, and Pacific. How many? It was like 3, 2.
I think it was 3.
3. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like a return to the structure of regionals for the most part, right? Very, very similar.
Essentially, yes.
In terms of the layout. Which, people liked regionals, but there was also a reason that HQ stopped doing it. I mean, I think some of the reason HQ stopped doing it was just because Glassman started talking, and then it's just like, yeah, here's whatever came out of my mouth. Like, let's do it that way instead. But I do think that there were reasons that they, stopped putting on so many events. Like, some of it I think was cost, some of it was logistical issues, which maybe having the international events run by people in those countries gets around some of that stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, what are your takes, John? I mean, you're the most up to date on all the CrossFit news. What do you think?
I mean, I think there are a lot of positives to it. As much as I don't like there being kind of yearly changes to the structure, which seems to be the case over the past 5 years, I think it is positive. I think the standardized programming is good. It allows people to see how each region stacks up against the other ones. It avoids situations where an athlete is at an unfavorable semifinal for their skills. It avoids issues of some people missing out on the games or getting to the games just because the workouts missed out something in programming or included something in programming. I believe Fittest in Cape Town last year had swimming, which I think was the only semifinal with swimming. And again, like that can be a big positive or negative for people. And obviously we know there's going to be some kind of swimming at the games, but someone could still get to the games without being good at swimming. or vice versa. Someone could get to the games because they're a great swimmer, and the reality is it's a much smaller part of the games than the like 6 scores that went into semifinals. So, I think having that standardized programming is a lot better way to do it. It does allow for less creativity, and I always enjoyed seeing the different semifinal workouts and seeing what different things people would come up with. As a coach, it was nice.
Yeah,
because,
actually, I liked that too.
I like to pull from different semifinals when I was working with people, and kind of there's so much more variety there to do variations on each of these workouts. But from a competition standpoint, I think it has to be standardized if you want to have a more well-rounded test. And I think having those events coming from HQ, who are programming the Open, the quarterfinals, and the games, it allows for a better flow through the season. And I think the overall shape of the programming means that it's fairer to say the winner of the games is the fittest, because they'll have tested everything across that time frame. Whereas with the semifinals being not programmed by HQ, it allowed things to be not completed across the season. My one example of this is not this past season, but the year before. Our team that went to the games, they didn't do ring muscle ups at all through the season. There was none in the Open, none in quarterfinals, and none at the games on the rings. They had bar muscle ups, but every semifinal had ring muscle ups apart from the one they went to. And it's like, that makes a difference. I think that same year was Sydney Wells was at, I want to say West Coast, and she was doing really well. And then there was a workout that started with 15 ring muscle ups, and she really struggled on them, and it dropped her out of games qualification. So, okay, if she'd been at our event, she might have made the games, and then that might have got exposed at the games. And, I think having one person or one group program the whole season is better for that continuity and hitting everything across the year.
I think what we will see as well is bit by bit, maybe year by year, more of these other events around the world then start to look more like the events that what we're going to see in the US and in Europe. But it sort of seems that like however many years ago it was when it was like, okay, we're just going to, qualification is going to happen through these, sanctional events and, national champions. And then it feels like bit by bit, year by year, things have sort of been taken back in by HQ and maybe, as money grows and as maybe the amount of sort of like connections that HQ has sort of around the globe, as that grows, you're probably going to see that bit by bit these events will start to be programmed the same and have the sort of same qualification process. Because I do remember that the CrossFit they said that they were giving sort of a guideline or whatever it was for these individual competitions to write the workouts. And you could see that some of them were trying to replicate that sort of those style of events that you would see at regionals, right? Like a long workout, a gymnastics bias workout, a chipper, a heavy event. You could sort of see that, but still there was quite a bit of discrepancy, and you were sort of seeing situations like you were saying, John. But yeah, I mean, hopefully that actually happens, but yeah, it might be a little bit of time before that does. And I don't think geographically you can consolidate Africa, Asia, Pacific, South America like you could with the US and Europe regions, or the North America.
What do you mean by that? Like geographically consolidate?
So like obviously we have like less events going on now in North America and Europe. I mean, maybe the Pacific and the Asia one could be consolidated. But like I don't yeah, so that may become like one bigger event. But I'm not too sure if South America and then Africa, I feel like those two regions and those areas are probably a little bit too far out to be combined with any of the other any of the other ones.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
you
think
mean like reducing the number of events further? Is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
because I mean, if you like, if we're saying that, say, regionals was the reason, one of the biggest reasons for getting rid of them was the cost, and you can see now, okay, there's less events going on. Obviously, they're bigger, but there's less events, which is going to reduce the cost quite a lot. Maybe these smaller ones where you have one person qualifying out of each one, maybe they, yeah, like I said, the Asia and Pacific might be consolidated, but the other ones probably they couldn't do that. But maybe the what we're looking at maybe in a couple of years time is 4 to 5 events all around the world that are going to be doing these this stage of qualification, which I think is pretty cool. I think it sort of, like we were saying before, it creates that hype, it creates that buzz, it gets people still feeling like, you know, they can make a push for it. It opens up opportunities for a lot more people within that bubble. Whereas I think that the way it's worked over the last few years, you've sort of seen the super talented athletes who are able just to bounce from competition to competition, sort of go in there, and then you're getting all backfield spots and everything like that. And it becomes a little bit more of like okay, well, just going to turn up and have this as my CrossFit Games. But people can actually make a bit of a push for it, and you can maybe see a little bit more things like upsets and that type of stuff happening.
I think one of the biggest things with the other events outside, let's say outside North America, Europe, and Australia, I think it's often seen that the athletes that qualify from those events for the games usually don't do as well, and there are obviously exceptions to that, but they're usually the athletes that make it aren't as good. And then it comes down to, okay, does HQ want to pay to put on a full competition to get one qualifier who then finishes kind of middle of the pack at the games? And then, you know, someone like Guy is obviously a little bit of a variant there in that he's probably the highest performing athlete we've seen come out of South America, Africa, Asia. But I think when ultimately regionals was broken up because of the cost of running that many events. And that's why it was put out to first the sanctionals, then the semifinals, not run by HQ. And I think there is a big trade-off there, as is it worth HQ spending all that money to have one qualifier come to the games? And I don't think you can combine those events. I think even Australia and Asia being combined is a bit of a stretch in terms of, you just think like distances people have to travel and the logistics of it. Because realistically, the event's going to be in Australia. Like people from New Zealand, not too bad to travel. People coming from China or Japan or Korea, like that's a big expense. That's a lot of travel. And I think condensing that down is probably unrealistic. I mean, already you take Africa, I guess you've got people coming from North Africa, Egypt, Morocco kind of thing, having to go to South Africa for the event is pretty excessive. I don't think they can compress this any more than they have. I think it would be too tough for that.
Luke,
Yeah, there we go. They're still, the qualification for these events is still happening based off of like your nationality or residency or
Citizenship.
citizenship. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I was going to say, I think that one of the other things with the regional system that didn't work, like you were saying, John, it's the cost, but I also think that like the opportunity cost of like, okay, we have like X number of events to put on, like that's such a heavy lift. And if you have people who have other things that they could or should be doing instead, you know, just taking on the load of running that many events, like you're just, you know, because a lot of the people who are in charge of regionals were like flow masters and like had other roles with HQ or whatever. So you're just like disabling a big percentage of your workforce to do events that were like poorly attended and losing a bunch of money, right? It's like, this just doesn't make sense. We can't actually do this anymore. So I think that the idea of having people do it locally, outside of the US and Europe, like, makes a lot of sense, because then you also, you run into the issues of like, oh yeah, we couldn't get the equipment, so like we had to do XYZ, right? And someone local is going to potentially have a better chance to deal with those issues rather than, trying to have that managed from afar by HQ, which is like, that's not really their primary thing. Is not putting on regionals, right? Their primary thing is putting on certifications, selling affiliate licenses, and the CrossFit Games, right? So it's just this like extra thing that you have to do in addition to that. So I totally understand
Yeah.
the
Do
interplay
you
there.
think that, because I mean, a lot of people are now starting to really be a lot more vocal about, hey, this sport needs a lot more, not necessarily like governance, but it just needs sort of some input from, like judges being actually like qualified and knowing how to do this and that type of stuff. But then also, because I know that the world of competition management and all of that type of stuff, like, that is not the same as putting on seminars, and you're asking people to like make quite significant changes in like how they, like what they do for a day job, and what their like general sort of day-to-day focus is. You're actually asking people to be like, okay, well, now you actually need to just go into sort of more like of this like project management type role, and you need to source all of this equipment, or you need to, it's more like logistics. um Unless you get sort of like these sort of like traveling, this like traveling CrossFit Games team that's like a Formula One team or something like that, that just like goes around the world to like different circuits. Um, but yeah, like that people are being a lot more vocal about it, so that the sport is actually a lot more. You could say you just don't have all of these like growing pains that are happening, and all of these potentially like unnecessary changes happening all the time because of the emphasis of the sport compared like to the methodology or the training system is always in competition with each other.
Yeah, Luke, I like that you mentioned Formula One, because that was something I wanted to go back to, right? Because I think that the 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 idea for sanctionals that like made sense to me was this idea of having, like, rather than this super defined qualification period of like, you do the open, you do regionals, and you go to the games, but rather having like a season of events that each event has some sort of like excitement associated with it, and people are like following the trajectory of the season, and there's a narrative that goes along with it. And it's like, oh cool, you like accumulate points at Wadapalooza, and then you accumulate points at Granite Games or whatever. And that you sort of see these people kind of like going from event to event, and there's like, yay, like we made the playoffs or whatever, right? That happens. And you see that with yes, I mean, Formula One, I think, is a great example. You see it with like golf has a structure somewhat like that. You can sort of think of the narrative in soccer / football, right? Where, like there's Champions League. It's kind of confusing. There's like Champions League, and you're like, okay, cool. And then there's like Premier League, and then there's all the, the leagues in other countries, and there's always a game happening, and there's some sort of like arc that your team is on that you can pay attention to. So I think that was a good idea. But I think that the sanctionals thing ended up kind of in the worst of both worlds, where it wasn't like a tight, like, this is how you qualify, you like win this event and then you go to the next one. And then and it wasn't like a season where you were sort of like going to a variety of different events and accumulating points and like having fun with it for a period of time. It was just like a mess and didn't actually make any sense. And so I think that you could sort of have to go one way or the other with that.
And I agree that it was a mess, but that we also have to remember that that was COVID year, and that season never got completed. So that was, it was very convoluted, and I don't think there was a clear, oh, this is how you make the games. But that was the year that we didn't get to see how it played out. And I think there could have been something there. I just think it wasn't structured enough, and I don't think either it wasn't clear enough or no one really knew, even at the top, as to the proper way to make it work. But I think it could have worked. I think more live competition is always going to be better. And the more you push it online, like, yes, it's more accessible to people. But you get into issues of standards and potential for cheating and all this kind of thing. I mean, I know, like, one of the coaches at our gym was one of the main guys on the team that ran MAC and Syndicate Crown this last year. And talking with him about it, it's just the events, they just don't make money. Like, they can sometimes cover costs, but the amount of work that goes into it is like, who wants to do that just to not make any money? Like,
yeah, the only way those things can make money is if you fucking sell out the arena. You're like, yeah, and we had 16,000 spectators. You're like, oh, okay, cool. But like, that's not happening.
Like, but this is sort of where I think. So I think with strength and depth, as a, I might be completely wrong off this, but from what I see, strength and depth also have a number of pairs competitions, which are always sold out, which happen in like London, Sheffield, and Cardiff. So they sort of like have 3 different areas. They also have like a large scale affiliate competition where you sign up a team of like 10 people, and it's sort of almost a bit like Grid League. I think it was sort of inspired a little bit off of that. But you have all of these sort of smaller events that are open to everyone, right? And like, I think that is the thing that brings in the sort of money for them to be able to put on a large scale event in, what used to be no, it's not the Olympic Centre. It used to be the Millennium Dome or whatever it was in London. But yeah, like, just to run an event off of like just the event and nothing else going on, and not having anything else sort of propping it up as such, it can be like a bit of a thankless task, really. And that's the reason why you see a lot of competitions coming up and then just disappearing as well. What do you think that this what do you think these implications, or what do you think the implications are for athletes and training and all of this type of stuff? I mean, do you think it's going to be just a sort of case of coaches paying a little bit more attention to what CrossFit HQ program? Do you think everyone's going to be doing crossover single unders, watching Buddy Lee videos and and trying to like? But what do you reckon there?
I mean, personally, I've already started trying to do a little bit more in that, in the way I program for competitive athletes. Like, people at our gym we've been working on, L-sit to press on the parallettes, and, doing a little bit more on the higher level gymnastics side and working on those things, because the way the games went this year, you just don't know to what level that's going to come next year. Which I think is good. Like, I think that's what you want. You want people to be challenged. You don't want it just to be, well, I know everything that's going to be there. I know exactly how to train for this. It's like, there needs to be an element of anything could be there. And I think, as much as people complained about like crossover double unders in the games last year, one, the fact that it was only the top 5 people in the field had to do them. So if you couldn't do them, it didn't really affect your scoring too much. And 2, just that was kind of the moment where people were like, well, I don't know what's going to get programmed. I don't know what's going to come up. And that unknown element, I think, has been lost maybe for a couple of years. And when Dave was programming the games, it was like, yeah, there's going to be stuff you don't know what's coming, but it's not really outside the realm of stuff you've done before. And I think this year pushed those boundaries a little bit, and I don't think it was excessive. There were some things which I didn't like, and I thought were just being different for different sake. But for the most part, I think that pushing of the boundaries is good for people's training, and is going to expand even more in this next year. So yeah, I think watching like what HQ programs on .com, but just almost going back to early days CrossFit when I think it was a little more varied. And before people kind of niche down into, okay, you need to be strong, you need to be good at gymnastics, you need to have a good engine.
Virtual shoveling.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the one. That was the best.
Bosman is a hobbyist jiu-jitsu person, so maybe there's going to be some like, I don't know. I could imagine there being some like obscure strength sport, like arm wrestling or stick wrestling or something like that. Like that would be quite interesting to watch.
Dude, what about the thing that Tom Soroka does, where you like hold on to a stick with another guy?
That's stick wrestling, where you have like your feet, on like a board. Yeah, I mean that.
What's that called?
It's called stick wrestling.
It's Mars wrestling or mass wrestling. I don't know what.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I think the idea that
Roman Krenikov and that guy from Poland will just like destroy everyone with his long arms and just insane grip.
Yeah, like I think the sandbag ladder at the games last year was a good example of that, of pulling from other sports and disciplines without it being so skill specific. And yeah, I mean, I think you look back to, I mean, not that I like this event because of the way it was set up, but the 2009 games when they had the 500 meter row, pounder, steel bar into the ground, and then 500 meter row.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's like that event wasn't done well because, well, yeah, the ground wasn't even, and it was like, it wasn't a fair
Some people just went right in, and other people were like, I think there's like metal under my...
Yeah.
I can't do it.
But, like the principle of that, and when they did still one of my favorite games events was the sandbag, where they carried them down the tennis stadium steps, put them in a wheelbarrow, took them across, carried them back up the other side, stuff like that, which is, I think, a little more old school CrossFit in terms of getting work done. And I think we will see a little bit more towards that. And I think if people's training isn't reflecting that, then they're going to be a step behind when it comes to maybe semifinals, at least the games.
Yeah, I think you might end up just like, I'm just sort of trying to think about this. If you're working with an athlete who's going to sort of get to that stage or is going to sort of be there, you probably just need to devote 1 or 2 windows per week where it's like, we do just different stuff, and it is just about learning to sort of like overcome new challenges and figure stuff out. Because I mean, I'd like even just seeing people in the way that they handle like kettlebells, the way people do like kettlebell clean and push press or kettlebell snatches and stuff. It's like, just, you can see there's like a lot of room for people to improve because they just approach it like it's a dumbbell or a barbell. And then stuff with the sandbag, I think people are getting a little bit more clued up on like how to do those types of lifts. But I definitely think that you're probably just going to have to, we've spoken a lot about just having, say, 20 minutes devoted to just playing around with new movements and doing a bit of practice and that type of stuff. But I think that type of training is probably going to be needed for people competing at that level, which is cool, because I remember when I started doing CrossFit, it was like Thursdays were an open gym day, and it was like, all right, what random shit can we find on YouTube to try today, and what bit of like weird equipment is there in the gym that looks like it's just been picked up from a hardware store, and let's make a workout out of it. So, which I think is good. I think there's some, which, you could say it just starts to align a little bit more with the methodology, but you have to get really good at burpees and rowing and wall balls and power snatches, 95 pounds, and then 95, 65, and then you can get into the crazy and weird stuff.
Yeah, totally. All right. So I guess the overall season structure, I don't know. My take is that I think that the sort of like iterative changes are good, right? I think like sudden broad sweeping changes like happened before are maybe not good, since those often aren't super well thought out. But being able to iterate on what is working and what's not working with like some sort of reasonable trajectory in mind, I think is a great situation for the sport. And even though the changes can be stressful for people, I think that they're necessary and hopefully beneficial. Yeah, I mean, for athletes, I mean, I don't feel like it changes that much, right? We didn't get too much into the details of having larger events with more qualifying spots, which I do think changes some things. But for a lot of the folks who I'm coaching who are like semifinals hopefuls, I don't think it changes that much. Just like, yeah, you just got to keep doing basically what we were working on. So I don't know. Any parting takes?
One other thing on that, I think one of the biggest positives is that people will know where and when their semifinal event is a lot earlier in the year.
Yes, that's true. Actually, that like seeding process was like a really strange and not.
I mean, it was only Europe and North America because they had multiple events, but it was, some people didn't find out until like 3 weeks before, 4 weeks before their event where they were going to be. And it's like booking flights and hotels and all that last minute bumps the price way up. It's like, okay, we know at least approximately where the events are going to be before the end of the year, we'll have dates and exact places for those events. And if you're a games level athlete and you're like, okay, I'm pretty confident I'm going to be at semifinals, it's like, okay, you can book stuff, you can get ready and prepared to go. And yeah, that's
I agree.
Positive.
That's much better. Yeah, that's much better. Yeah, it was really strange because you would people just get shipped to ones that didn't make any sense for them too. Yeah,
right.
It was very strange. I didn't like that. Cool. All right, good. Yeah, hope it's good. Hope it works out for everybody.
Fingers crossed.
Should I do a gong to finish off?
Yeah, let's finish 100%. Off with the gong too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is we're now closing the meditation.
Closing ceremonies.
Yes. Good. Yeah, I mean, I personally feel at peace, so I think we're good.
The gong kind of amps me up.
It looks like a giant marshmallow. You got a big s'more.